the communities, the landless people who depend on these kind of lands, they are severely affected by such measures. So we need to be mindful of these measures when we design those. Uh, so what can be done? I mean, the topic given, I think societal reforms is quite a ambitious kind of a goal, but we need to be ambitious, I suppose. And for this to bring in reforms, I think we need to change our attitudes, our norms, our practices, which is not an easy thing at all, as we all know. And to bring in these large scale changes, there could be some factors which are endogenous and some kind of factors which may be from outside. So the factors which are within could be the environmental organizations, for example, who can bring in change. In Pune, we have the example of Pune River Revival, Jivit Nadi, Parisar, those kind of groups who have been doing excellent work for last many years. Outfits like that could be a catalyst to bring in these changes. And civil societies, as we all know, play an important role because they can also promote collaboration between the private sector, the government, and the other sectors of the society. So their role is very important. They can also encourage communities to take ownership of climate action through education. It could be capacity building, it could be resource allocation, and they can also support the sustainable practices at the grassroots level. One of the other things I think we should be also doing is bringing in the traditional knowledge when we design the measures and other activities. Professor Gadgil was here in the morning and he's done pioneering work with his team members in bringing in the traditional knowledge through one of the ways I think they did was People's Biodiversity Register. As we know, indigenous peoples have been living with nature for thousands of years. And when we are talking about circular economy in the context of climate change, we can learn a lot from them. So we should be making a conscious effort to bring in their knowledge. And even within the traditional, I mean, the indigenous community, focusing on women's knowledge, because we often see that in villages, you have women who are not formally educated, but who have so much of knowledge about environment and other things. And we in the sense, the scientific community usually tends to overlook this knowledge. I think we need to bring that in. And I think one of the most contentious, trickiest part, the bailing the cat, is changing our values. I mean, today is Women's Day, and patriarchal values we see everywhere. And how to change that? Are we even willing to accept that we have certain values which are not right, if I may call that? So how can we do that? How can we bring in women and other marginalized communities in the decision making, in planning, in implementation? So we need to think more about that. We need to adopt more gender responsive strategies when we talk about climate change. The gender action plan, the climate change gender action plan, they should be designed. And I think overall, we need to encourage open dialogue across the various sections of society, various strata of society, and talk more about the injustice, more about inclusion, the causes of inequality. And we don't really do that, in my view. I mean, we tend to be more politically correct, and some of the issues or the contentious topics we tend to avoid. But I think we should also find platforms how we can have this open dialogue, and hopefully eventually will change. I'm a diehard optimist, so I think we will change if we keep talking and having open dialogue. Thank you.
Can I ask one question? I have a question. Can this happen of its own by the society without creating incentives? And if so, what kind of incentives we can provide, and who is that we? Not the government. I'm not talking about the government. So can the non-government agencies, think tanks, whatever you want to call it, can we pull in resources for societal reforms towards climate change? Something totally out of the box. Somebody will call me crazy, But I think it is time to be crazy.
Right, right. And I think that's where organizations like PIC can really play a crucial role, because I think you have people who have worked in the government sector, who are in the corporate sector, and who have a lot of ideas.
So my earlier part of my question,
Mhm.
how to create incentive?
Yeah, so how to create, again, I think the dialogue and the exchange of ideas is the way to go. I mean, because I think what we should not do is just impose our ideas. So the ideas should come from people. So that's why I'm saying to have that dialogue, and have the dialogue with people who are really affected by climate change severely. So bring in their ideas, their views, and then based on that, we can design incentives as yours.
For instance,
Mm.
housewives, ladies can play a huge role in reducing the expenditure of the house, reducing consumerism. How can we incentivize a family, urban family, to bring down its disposable, not disposable, discretionary spending? Something like that. I want some input so that we can put it in our report.
So I think one thing I would urge to remember is, when we talk about things like this, we should also keep in mind the power balance. I mean, when we talk about, for example, housewives or children, and how, so do they really have the power? I mean, that also we need to consider. I mean, of course, there are ways how to do it. I mean, right now, I can't really think of any concrete ways to suggest, but yeah, and definitely the homemakers, the housewives, whatever you call them, they have a lot of,
Can make a
like,
huge
yeah,
difference.
yeah, definitely. I mean, they play such an important role.
Absolutely.
So yeah.
Any other suggestion on this particular topic? Anybody? Yeah, please.
Yeah.
Right. Anybody can give. Yeah, somebody is getting a microphone.
Hi, my name is Sucheta Dhere. I'm a digital transformation consultant. So I am thinking of this idea of creating some incentive like civilized citizen credits. It's not only about sustainability; it's about everything. I pay all my bills on time. I don't break traffic rules. I don't uh, do anything. Similarly, if there are n number of things in the house where I reuse, whether it is dry weight, wastage, paper, milk papers, electronic waste, all the kind of envelopes I receive, I reuse and recycle 2-3 times.
What is your motivation?
Sir, I believe in sustainability. So if we, give credits, if I do something good, I get credit, whether it in office, whether it is in house, or whether it is in society. And, I gain credit points, some kind of, system like loyalty points, which can then be further in first, I suppose I say cycled for 50 kilometers in a month. So I get 5 credits. In a year, I get 15. So,
What credit? Carbon credit?
yeah, everything. So we can identify like n number of such things which you do. You are protecting, you're contributing to the environment.
Yeah.
And then, you further incentivize, reward people for doing this.
Good.
Something
Thank
like
you.
this.
Yeah. Anybody else? All right. Shall we move to the next panelist? Next is Aditi. Yeah.
Hello. So first, I would like to clarify I'm not a consumer expert. I am a consumer and I am aware about human resilience, but I'm an ecology and climate researcher. The idea behind this point was I'm covering a role of human resilience and reducing consumerism. So the idea was that when we talk about the scientific aspects and political aspects, one thing that gets ignored many times is how do you react to it as an individual, as a household, as a community. And then we have our internal discussions on that, because even we are living in a society where we need to interact or convince people around us to actually integrate climate change or climate thinking in their own lives. So I think what I'm going to talk is a synthesis of my discussions, especially with Professor Malik, and luckily with the Climate Collective Pune members, some of whom are here. Basically, apart from understanding the climate emergency, we have to also understand that we are living in the midst of it and we'll need to adapt to the new normal. And the first thing we need to assimilate is that it is not something which is happening outside or somewhere else. It is something which we are going through. And then if you are going through a new challenge, how do you face it? So the human resilience aspect becomes very important, because one thing which the climate emergency is going to increase is the number of uncertainties in your life. And like any other uncertainties which you face in your work or going through your social interactions, they themselves are going to get complicated. And to top it up, you are going to face environmental emergencies and environmental stresses, which are going to add to your burden in when you go through your life. So basically, human resilience in itself is defined as first is how you can adapt to changing situations. Second is whether you can bounce back after the challenges you face. And third is trying to maintain your psychological well-being in all this. So all these three parameters are going to apply when we actually go through the climate crisis and the environmental crisis. And hence, the three solutions which we often discuss are basically boiled down to how we change our behavior, our thinking, and how we act on it. So basically, if we look at the behavior aspect, first thing, like I said, we need to be prepared for uncertainties and we need to adapt to the new normal. We have to accept that we are living in a climate challenge world. This, especially in the younger generations, we often see eco anxiety to some extent. Up till now, it has not been flagged exactly as a mental disorder, but it is considered more in a positive way or a rational feeling based on your knowledge of the outside world. But eventually it may go to that level, and climate extreme events itself have their psychological consequences, which can be right from facing death of loved ones to smaller things like environmental stress due to heat waves or loss of productivity or things like that, or not getting right sort of labor and things. So first and foremost, we will have to create systems or encourage systems which help us to understand and address the mental and physical health impacts of climate change. And sometimes it feels unnecessary or a burden, but in the long run, they are the ones who are going to help us when we are in facing actually an extreme situation, because you won't have time for learning during that time. So all those learning and those capacities we need to develop right now. And that depends even on knowing like local say offices in your area where you can go for help and things like that. Secondly, in the behavior aspect about eco anxiety, if you encounter someone and if you can help them in your own way, that would be good. And for our own use, or rather, the way of addressing eco anxiety is similar to way we address our own difficulties, which is trying to have a positive mindset, finding the actionable solutions, and so on. Second aspect is that apart from behavioral changes, um, thinking is also going to, the way we think is going to be very important. Many times there has been this continuous process or hammering that climate has to be considered as a separate entity and every other life goes on as it is. But that wall has broken long ago. We now need to consider environment and climate implications in our actions and in our daily decision making. So something like pragmatism, where we decide how much is actually necessary, how much can we maintain, and things like that are not going to help us just with the climate crisis. They are also going to contribute to at least slightly reducing the climate crisis we are facing. And second thing which we find during awareness is, I think Yuval Noah Harari puts it well, information is not truth. So you will have to actually invest in checking what is actually green, what is actually sustainable, what is just greenwashing and not actually uh, helping the environment or even rather harming it. So we have a lot of information even on green now, but unfortunately we will have to educate ourselves into at least receiving that information or finding the right resources so that we don't get astray. And one part in thinking and behavior which you can immediately work on is conscious consumerism. We are living in an economic system where we are consumers and the whole system is designed that way. But the least we can do is that we ensure that the consumerism is at least where it does not contribute to the evils of the system, which is over exploitation or resource consumption or over extraction of resources, pollution, and human violation of human rights and things like that. So that is actually a very easy thing to understand, but integrating it our decision making and not just being aware of it. So when you find something which is happening wrong, if you can find alternatives or support initiatives which are considering all this, then I think it will create a positive pressure on good economic practices and discourage the negative ones. And the second benefit of that is that you get a time of slowness or to think, which will help you to like address even other situations or work life situations you face. And lastly, I would request that if possible, try instead of being thinking sustainability as only a lifestyle thing, if you can incorporate it in your own professions in terms of design or processes, then I think we will have a better understanding of and better answers to when someone says this is the system and there is no alternative. So finding those alternatives and showing that they work is also going to be very important. And I think I'm more or less done. I'll just like to conclude that there is going to be a next panel discussion on sustainable development. We have listened to the problems before. So we have answers in the nature and the communities, like Girija said, and also the innovation or the technology part, but we are not tapping them to their full potential. And at least if we accept that, that's the point we can start with. And resilience is now not a luxury, it is going to be a means of survival. The second aspect is that sometimes resilience is also to push responsibility on the people. It will not work that way. Climate action has to happen, but resilience should be an aspect which is considered within climate action. And personally, as an evolutionary biology student, I think there is a very twisted notion in our society that being strong or dominant is going to ensure your survival. But dinosaurs are not here now. So we will have to learn to adapt. So learn, act, and adapt. I think that's the three things we need to do for sustainability and live them. Thank you.
Fine. Thank you. I just want to remember and remind that there was a time when Diwali patakas were very rampant, and that they are polluting, that they are harmful, was inculcated by parents, by society into the children, by teachers in their school, and it happened. So something like that out of the box have to happen in terms of what is must have and what can be classified that may, well, not really. So discretion between must have and may have, that kind of a things should come within the young children. There are some NGOs already working in Pune. They are recirculating the toys and dolls among children so that everybody doesn't have to buy new things. So there's many small ways things are already happening. What we need to do is to incentivize and scale up. I hope that will happen. So our next panelist is Anaga. She's she's an architect, and in the building and infrastructure, what we do today lasts there for next 50, 60 years. So therefore, it's very challenging for reducing the imprint or the footprint of the infrastructure. Anaga?
Thank you, sir. It's a privilege to be here. Thank you, PIC, all the trustees in front of me, Professor Malik and my co-panelists. I think Dr. Ajit Ranade laid down a very good context for what I'm going to place in front of you today. And I'm going to borrow possibly a minute from Girija and sort of show some numbers. And those numbers are, of course, alarming numbers. But the point is that in this era of climate change, how are we going to tackle that? Because those numbers are not going away. Those numbers are probably the reality. Yes, there are some predictions, and like Dr. Ranade mentioned, that sometimes predictions also tend to go wrong a little bit. Sometimes we are over predicting something, it may not really pan out to be true. But from what we have seen of India in the last 60, 70 odd years, these numbers are what our future going to be. Next, please. So this is the urbanization, and as rightly mentioned by Dr. Ranade, it is relentless, it is unstoppable, it is not pausing even for a second. Right from 1947, if we consider our independence as a starting point, we have not seen any less urbanization that has happened till today. So urbanization is here to stay. All across the world, cities have taken countries out of poverty. Cities have propelled economic growth, and cities have become engines where poor nations have become wealthier nations. And with our 2047 goal of being a developed country after 100 years of our independence, I think cities are going to play a very, very crucial role. And this is what cities are today. In 2047, more than 50% of our population is expected to be in cities, which is around 900 million people. Today, we are at 377 million people, and see the negative externalities of urbanization, which also Dr. Ajit Ranade expressed very clearly. So what we are going to do with our cities is going to chart out our future plan for climate, for ecology, and for our future generation. Next. Again, a quick glance. I had just one small sentence behind that. India is often known as an reluctant urbanizer. And despite those numbers, we are not really reluctant in terms of becoming urbanized, but in our mindsets, we are often very reluctant urbanizers. We still romanticize the village. We still romanticize going back to our roots. And I think that is a very unique kind of a citizenry that we have in our cities in India. Again, urbanization level, I'll skip through this for a want of time. One fact about urbanization, which, we always talk about cities in a negative light. We always say cities are polluted, cities are creating congestion, cities are noisy, air pollution. But what we fail to realize is, see these numbers, just go back one. 70% of the population today in India is employed in agriculture and allied, which contributes to about 30 to 35% of GDP. 60% of land is under agriculture. 30% of population is today in cities, employed in cities away from agriculture, and it is contributing to 65 to 70% of the GDP. and it covers only 3% of India's land resource. So cities are actually extremely efficient models of generating economy. We cannot forget that. See, all of us are experiencing the negative externalities of the cities, and yet all of us are here. Nobody's moving out of Pune, right? So what I'm trying to say is that cities also give us a lot of benefits, a lot of positive factors which we enjoy in our cities, and we have to accept that fact and move towards planning. The urbanization pull, I think the push and pull is evident in the way we have looked at cities. You will see here that just a quick outlay of investments by the central ministry, 1.8 lakh crores for rural and 1.3 lakh crores for urban. Yes, right now we are not even 50% urban, but we are contributing 65 to 70% to the GDP. Yet the outlay for the urban is less than the rural. So our investment is less. Just go back one again. We are approximately estimated an outlay of 4.6 lakhs crores annually. It is only 1.3 lakh crores. So we are a deficit of about 4 times, or rather, 25% is only getting invested in our cities. And whatever we are seeing is evident for all of us in our everyday lives. These are some of the estimates. I don't know. I'm not an economist by profession, so I don't know whether to believe these numbers. But these are huge numbers. That 70 lakh crores by 2036 and 850 lakh crores by 2047 if we want our cities to really become livable and good engines of economic growth. Next. I will run through this. So right now, basically, despite the need to become decentralized, to take decisions at the local level, we are still run by the state governments because that's where our main funding comes from. Next. Yes. So how do we manage urban investment for planning and building our cities? And when I say investment, please do not take this as investment in physical infrastructure. It means generally investment. It could also be about research. So my first hypothesis is that our first investment, when we start moving towards better cities, moving towards cities which are going to function economic-wise also quite good, we need investment in urban governance. I think without governance, and I think 2-3 speakers since morning have spoken that rules are there, it is not implemented. It's because of governance, lack of governance. So in governance, we need investment. We need investment in urban data and analytics. We do not have data of cities. We do not know where cities are growing. We do not have a cell in Pune Municipal Corporation who is churning only urbanization data, looking at how the development plan is moving, whether it is moving or not, whether it is helping people, or are we just building something that was planned 20 years ago. So all that urban analytics we need to see. We need to create 2 levels of plans, not just partial plans, but economic plans for cities as well. There are economic plans made for states, but they are not made for cities. I think economic plans is very essential for cities if they are supposed to drive us towards being a developed country. And then, of course, investing in future infrastructure is very, very critical. We severely lag behind infrastructure. Projects take time to get approved. They get time to get actually see the light of day. So we need to have a governance system which does this very fast. Next. Yes, this is the second aspect of a city. Many countries and even India has tried investing in cities which are, greenfield cities. So you go outside and say, okay, this is a nice plot of land and I will build a city there. Cities rarely get built like this because of its soft infrastructure. We need education facilities. We need diverse economic sectors for a city to become attractive. It needs to be livable to attract the right kind of talent of people, and that's where Pune wins. It's not a capital of Maharashtra, yet it wins when it comes to this aspect of being livable and cultural and recreational opportunities. Next. Yeah, so spatial plans. I'm just going to highlight the 2 aspects. The dilemma that an urban planner or an urban policymaker faces today is whether we keep the city's footprint limited and grow up, or do we keep the city's low rise and increase the footprint. So vertical versus horizontal development spatially is today the what आपण म्हणतो ना कळीचा मुद्दा आहे तो सध्या की आपण नक्की कुठल्या साईडला जायचं. का काही hybrid third model आहे, where we have a very dense core center and then you have sort of spokes going out to slightly low-rise development. To a large extent, हे आता आपण जे पुण्याच्या आजूबाजूला टाउनशिप डेव्हलपमेंट बघतो ती सॉर्ट ऑफ ह्या पद्धतीची आहे, but we have, because of the UDCPR, again, that verticality aspect is emphasized in spatial plans. Next. This is how vertical cities look, and that's how horizontal cities look. So each has its own environmental problems. Next. And while all of this urbanization was happening, while the Western countries went ahead with their models of urbanization, their planning of infrastructure in an age where climate change was not so significant, now we have this added challenge of climate change, heat waves, loss of biodiversity, water scarcity, and frequency of natural disasters. So now this is, already a खूप complex गोष्ट चालू, डाळ शिजत होती त्याच्यामध्ये अजून काही मीठ पडलेलं आहे, and how are we going to deal with that? Next. Yes, so like I said, urban governance needs to step up, agile and responsive, enhanced capacity for urban planning. We do not have a cell of urban planning, even in a big and a relatively better urban municipal corporation like Pune. Legal frameworks are seriously lacking. We do not have ways and means to resolve legalities in urban planning. Efficient project management, which I mentioned, and timely infrastructure. Next. Sustainable urbanism. I think I'll skip these parts. Most of the aspects that I was going to talk about was innovation, like Professor Malik and then Professor Mashelkar also mentioned that this conference is about finding solutions. So there are some snippets that I've tried to put here that while all of this happening, we cannot stay back. Urbanization is anyways happening outside the doors of this conference, even while we are speaking about it. So how do we do it in our everyday manner? What do I do as an architect? What do you do as an economist? What does somebody do as a social, entrepreneur? So these are some of the things that we can look at, that decarbonization can become the mantra for all policies, which is not happening right now. There are, of course, crossroads, but we can always see whether the intent of decarbonization is being met or not. Sometimes we may have to take a step back and compensate it in some other ways and means possible. But are we overall moving towards decarbonization? And for that, I come back to the point of being very, very, know our data. We have to know where we are going. So energy use, and we need energy efficiency, shift to renewables, EVs. We need to incentivize public transport. I keep saying that public transport investments need to be looked at with the same eye as we do defense investments. It's for the security of our country. And we don't think about how much money is being spent for that. But we think about how much money is spent in public transport systems, but it is equally important to have that mobility in cities which is efficient. Waste efficiency, water, waste to energy products, promote green city and green building principles on everyday thing, offset emissions through sequestration. And here in the last slide I had mentioned, plant anywhere and everywhere you can find. Get rooftops to be made vegetative. Vertical areas can be made vegetative. Everywhere we have to include the green leaf, so to speak. Local incentivization for biodiversity. What is right now happening is we are indirectly, in our quest for development, disincentivizing biodiversity conservation. Or, for example, if I have an open plot of land and I plant some trees on it, I do not plant in the thing that if next year I want to build a building, I will not get permission to cut. So, we are indirectly disincentivizing anybody from planting trees. So this is what if we can, like you were saying, that if there could be some economic benefits for somebody to plant trees, that would help us move over. And then low carbon materials. This is now coming in a big way. India needs to do its Jugaad innovation to get low carbon materials in place. We can see some massive shifts when our buildings, all our roads, all our infrastructure that we want to move towards 2047 will be low carbon. It will see a massive shift. Next, I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anu. This was a vast subject. I don't think we could do justice at the time available. So I request Anaga to supply us the slides and with the notes so that we can, no, I'm serious because whatever we are doing, we want this to be a part of a sizable, meaningful report. And that we will submit to the government, to Niti Aayog and so on and so forth. So please help us. Last. Yeah, there could be any questions. One question here. Yes. Who is speaking?
Thank you. I'm Anita Beninger.
You can. Yes, Anita.
I know we are
Yeah.
very old friends. I have a question for Anagha's urbanization
Yeah.
definition. I think most of Indian cities, if you see, 50% of our population lives in Jhopadpattis. So what is your take on that? Do you think they are urbanized?
Yes, because the definition of urbanization as it stands today is that they are not engaged in agricultural activities. So if they are within the jurisdiction of a city, then I would say that they are urbanized.
Okay. One question
Reluctantly,
about
not.
definition of cities. I think we need to take a
Yes,
relook and
probably.
it has to be changed. No, but all these people are engaged in, they are called so-called tertiary activities. But do you think scavengers, garbage pickers, sweepers, etc., are actually engaged in tertiary activities? Because primary, secondary, tertiary, I think Girija is here.
What would you call them?
I would call them primary.
Okay.
How will they be tertiary? Because there is no intellect applied. What is it? There is no manufacturing. There is no processing, nothing. I think agriculture is more difficult. It just multiplies, but there is plowing, there is planting. A lot of technology is used in that. If you are picking rack picker, if you are a rack picker, how do you become a part of the tertiary activity? They are called tertiary activities and said that they are living in cities, so they are urban. Because urbanization is actually a subset of civilization. And it is supposed to take you forward. It is supposed to give you urbanity, which is a different set of values.
I think it's a complex topic. I don't
It
think
is.
you can do
So I think
justice.
we need to not trivialize urbanization.
No,
like
of course
this.
not.
Yeah.
Of course not.
It's extremely serious.
Yeah. For want of time,
Yeah.
Can you talk to us later on?
Maybe one question, because this is related on the suggestion she has given about decarbonization of the society and the cities. This exactly refers to the 2 points. What Dr. Mashelkar said, that we have cutting trees and then scrambling for solutions. This is not the crisis of nature, but it's it's a crisis of leadership.
What is your question?
The question is, in the decarbonization, what suggestions are we given is why don't we look at our local issues right now? This is an emergency conference. This is a climate emergency.
Yeah.
So we have to first, the charity starts at home. So what about those projects which are happening here in Pune? Especially the River Development Fund project, the destruction of the urban forest here in Pune.
It's not by people. We are talking about people.
And we are talking about the projects which is affecting the climate emergency locally.
Correct.
So my question as to the urban planner as such is, how does she look at this particular projects? Thank you.
Yeah, so my suggestion would be to look at the project with the lens of a climate change, and whether we are addressing, whether we are moving forward. Like I mentioned, in urbanization, there could be sometimes steps back that have to be taken, but are we really compensating those steps that we are taking backwards? Are we moving in the right direction? Because India is poised at a very critical role where we will still need to build, where our carbon emissions are still going to grow, but whether for per unit of rupee earned, whether that carbon is efficiently utilized or not is really the question here. So yes, each project should go through that, like a fire test of whether you are meeting your climate change requirements or not.
Thank you. I'm happy that the discussion is warming up, but a bit too late in the day because we have limited time. So may I request President, to please take the next one. Please connect with us later on.
Yeah. Maybe some of the questions will be answered as we go along. Let's see.
In the mic.
It's not working. I don't think it's working. You will have to move the slides for me. You can go to the second. Okay, fine. So just to point out that we are in a climate emergency because these were the predictions of IPCC and we are not really getting there. The impacts are increasing across the world, and we were supposed to start reducing our fossil fuel consumption from 2030 onwards. That's highly unlikely with the way the US politics has evolved in the last few months. And we need to also start removing carbon dioxide, but there also we still don't have very powerful tools in our hand. Just keep greening and some small technologies like biochar, those are the only options available. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. These couple of decades are going to be really, really crucial, 2020 to 2040. History will look back and say that these were the decades of climate action or inaction. We are, in a way, writing the history of the future. And this is next. Yeah. This is happening in times when the entire politics across the world, you see, take it, I mean, USA is a very glaring example, but even in India, politics is financed by petroleum companies. This is a huge conflict of interest when it comes to climate action by the political establishment. And that, in a way, is responsible for creating this emergency. So how are we going to solve this? However, I want to just point out a few things here in the Indian context. You can just, if you look at the cumulative emissions, because the impacts that we are facing today are because of the additional greenhouse gases that have gone into the atmosphere since the Industrial Revolution. So if you look at this entire cumulative emissions, our contribution is minuscule. We are not responsible for the problems that we are facing today. We will be responsible for the problems in the future. But even then, even in 2050, our share will be just about 10%, which basically means that we have to have realistic understanding that even if we go carbon neutral, that will just be a minute dent in solving this global problem. I'm not saying that we should not go towards reducing our emissions, but we have to have that realism that we are not in a position to really solve this problem. If we look at the carbon neutrality pledges, and this is an interesting thing to think about, we are one of the top 4 emitters. We are also going to be one of the last bunch of countries to go carbon neutral. And right now that 2050 target is highly shaky because of US, which is definitely not going to become carbon neutral by 2050, because in the next 4 years, everything is going to go wrong there. So that's the thing, that if the 2050 target is not being met, then it doesn't matter whether China and India go carbon neutral or not. The problem will have already escalated to very high level. If that target is met, then all the eyes will be on us. However, the entire climate discourse is written by developed countries. If you look at the way reports are given about the COP discussions over the last few years, India and China are always painted as these people who are blocking action, etc., etc. So history will write us as villains no matter what we do. That also is something that we have to keep in mind. Next slide. Our problem is actually unique because not only do we need to reduce our emissions, even if only to keep us relevant in the global discussions, if nothing else,
But our bigger problem is that we are also one of the countries most vulnerable to climate change, and we don't talk about this enough. We have to do more to actually help our own citizens to deal with climate change. And this becomes a bigger, complicated problem because the groups in the population which are contributing to emissions and which are getting impacted by emissions are two entirely different population groups. And those who are contributing to emissions are benefiting from it. That makes it even more difficult to create effective mechanisms to help reduce vulnerabilities. So we have to understand all these tensions and dynamics that are there within the Indian society itself when we talk about our climate action. Next slide. Just keep pressing. There are layers of climate injustice in India. In the international negotiations, especially last year, this was very striking. I was there in Azerbaijan. It was a very unusual COP. But India is now turning out to be a sort of a lone crusader for all developing countries talking about climate justice issues. But within India, there is climate injustice. We have to first address that in order to give ourselves that moral authority to talk about it internationally. Environmental legislations are being weakened left and right. No cognizance of climate change in environment impact assessments. And that is the reason why we see these projects that you are talking about, riverfront development, breakthrough takeries to create roads. All of this is happening because our laws are outdated. Our laws are not even looking at what climate change is going to do to our cities. How are we going to address that fundamental issue while we also keep fighting these local fires? States are coming up with adaptation plans. This is not the first time states came up with climate action plans. Way back in 2010s, also there were state level adaptation plans. Where are those glossily printed documents now? Even the secretariats will not be able to find them, I'm sure. Because adaptation or any climate action requires multiple government departments to work together. Our governments are just not used to that kind of mode of operation. That is another barrier in climate action. Next slide. So that's the thing, that we have to work on these four things: reduce emissions, sequester carbon, build responsive resilience, and disaster preparedness. But no systemic planning seems to be happening. There are a number of actions which can happen, which can achieve both. So while achieving adaptation, we can also keep on reducing our emissions. But if you look at the way budgets are allocated, we are still allocating a lot of funding, for example, for large scale renewable energy, not enough to decentralize renewable energy, which will give us both mitigation and adaptation. So these are the issues that need to be corrected. Next slide. And that's the last one, I think. And this is really the big question. Can thought leaders, and I am assuming that all of us at least think or aspire to be thought leaders, can we raise climate literacy to the level that people will force politics to be unshackled from petroleum? Because politicians are moved only by two things. One is money, other is votes. Money is not in our hands, votes is in our hands. However, it was really concerning for me today to see the extent of climate misinformation that has spread when an eminent economist talks about people's breathing contributing to climate change. I'm sorry, that's a very, very wrong and unethical statement to make. Because that's the kind of an argument which has been forwarded, which points fingers to the poorest parts of the world, which is where population is still increasing. But those people are not contributing to climate change. Climate change is happening because of those parts of the world where populations are decreasing, but they don't want to take that responsibility. And that is why population numbers are considered as one of the cause of climate change. But no biological system is ever contributing to climate change. It is the additional greenhouse gases that go into the climate. That is responsible for climate change, and that comes from burning petroleum fuels. If that much understanding is not there among thought leaders, then how are we going to raise the literacy? That's a big concern that has come for me today in this conference. And can we do this fast enough to avoid civilizational collapse, which people are predicting will happen in the middle of this century? So this is really the questions that we have to ask ourselves and address emergency in that context by looking at the global connectivity of these issues and figuring out what we need to do locally. I think raising science-based climate literacy has to be a priority on the scale that raising literacy was made a priority in this country at one point in time. Even if we focused on that, a lot of issues will resolve themselves. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Priya. Wow. We tried to tackle a problem, an animal, which cannot be managed, but that too in less than 1 hour. But all said and done, many issues have come up, many thoughts have come up. Priyadarshini is a thought leader in climate justice. So obviously, she's going to feel very strongly about in the process of climate change. Once again, we should not make the same mistake. So everywhere we will find that we are going through a complete societal churning, complete humankind churning. My generation has escaped, but the young generation will have to deal with it and deal with it in a constructive way, in a positive way, so that we end up in 50 years so. Why 50 years? We are not really talking about 2050, but 25 years. What we do in the next 25 years will decide what we will do in the next 25 decades. The role of society, role of people, role of homes, families cannot be understated. That is what we wanted to bring it together in this session. Unfortunately, we ran out of time. This deserved much more detailed discussion. One question cannot do any justice to anybody. Everybody knows that. Huh? We don't want to hear. We don't want to hear what you did. I don't think in this environment, in this. I'm sorry. So that when discussed, see, there are 3 levels of discussion, concept, execution, and functional. Functional level पे लोग बात काम करने वाले नहीं, ऊपर के 2 लेवल के खाए लोग गुलाब खिलाते रहते हैं, जमीन पे काम करने के लिए आइएगा. When started coming, we have. I've heard of your talk. I've heard of your work. Can you please come and spend some time with us? Help us prepare a policy paper. This is the job that we do in PIC. We propose policy advisory paper, we propose to government, and we try to push it. So that's yeah. Thank you very much. I think for the want of time, we have to close here. Let me first sincerely thank my panelists. Wonderful thoughts shared in such a short time. And once again, I'll say that please share your thoughts and let's put together a concrete plan on how society can respond to the inevitable climate emergency that is happening. Thank you.
I just request Professor Amitabh Malik to present a token of appreciation
Yeah.
to all the panelists.
Thank you everyone for such an informative panel discussion on societal challenges in a climate challenged world. Now, as it has been always said, every problem has a solution. We will move on to the solutions aspect of it. Dr. We have Dr. Gurudas Nulkar, who is a renowned environmentalist, sustainability expert, and an educator, serving as a professor and director of the Center for Sustainable Development at Gokhale Institute of Politics in Pune. He has dedicated his career to advancing sustainable development, ecological economics, and alternative economic models. His contributions to environmental literature are widely recognized, having authored 5 books, including the acclaimed Marathi book Anartha Shastra, which received the C.D. Deshmukh Award in Economic Literature from Government of Maharashtra. 2 of his books have been honored with the Maharashtra State Literature Award. Beyond academia, Dr. Gurudas Nulkar actively serves on the board of Ecological Society Pune, contributing to policy discussions and ecological conservation efforts. His extensive body of work bridges the scientific research, industrial applications, and grassroots sustainability initiatives, making him a key advocate for climate resilient development and sustainable business practices in India. I would now request Dr. Gurudas Nulkar to take the dais.
Allow me to add, Gurdas Tulkar is an essential component, essential part of our team, and a wonderful person. Apart from anything, a truly wonderful human being. Thank you, sir. One request. Yes, sir. Before you start the question, the panel discussion, please spend 10 minutes in explaining or sharing your thoughts on sustainable development. Thank you so much. One more suggestion that after this, there was supposed to be a session where we would come up with suggestions for Dr. Kelkar to consider. I think given the time, we should spend more time with each other, and that part of coming up with policy recommendations for the consideration of the Vice President, we will do it offline after the conference.
Thank you so much. I'm going to spend not more than 10 minutes exactly, because we know we are running out of time, and the temperature outside as well as inside is getting hotter. So I would like to cool things down a bit. So thank you so much for inviting me here and to be able to express some of my thoughts in this space. I want to start with what I heard Dr. Ranade say in the morning, and he talked about price as a signal for something in economic growth. And he especially talked about the famous Simon and Paul Ehrlich bet, which resulted in, Paul Ehrlich losing the bet. And he said that the 4 minerals actually reduced their prices over a 10-year period. Unfortunately, this example is probably not the right way to put in, and I'm free to talk. Dr. Ranade was formerly my boss, so today I don't have any problem talking against him. And I never did, because, we had a very healthy dialogue in many matters, and that was very useful. So a reduction in prices of minerals can be attributed to at least 2 things. Many other things, but at least 2 things. One is that the supply outstrips the demand, which means there is over extraction of that mineral. And in all probability, this is what happened when Ehrlich predicted it. So today we know there is an over extraction of minerals. In fact, if you go to the Indian Bureau of Mines website, IBR has a website, and on the website, they will have a list of mines which are stocked out. And that list goes to over about 200 mines in India, which do not have any of the minerals that they originally meant to have. So one part about what Dr. Ranade said would be that, attributed to the second thing is the substitution effect. So that particular mineral is substituted by another mineral, and therefore the price of that mineral drops down. Now, in both these cases, both these cases are not good for climate change. Over extraction, as we know, is basically removal of more minerals from earth, which means we have to deforest, we have to dig the earth, we have to take out stuff, we have to pollute the water, so on and so forth. As well as the other thing where you have to substitute and do that, because in that case, the Jevons paradox kicks in. So both these, in fact, I especially wanted Dr. Ranade to be here, but unfortunately he had to leave. I'll give you the other side, which happens with price as a feedback mechanism. And there is a very perverse feedback which happens with price rise. And I'll give you the example of overfishing. You know, overfishing has always been a problem because there is a limited stock of fish, and the fish breeding has a particular cycle. Fish populations are in a cycle, so on and so forth. So therefore, fishermen always have this feedback mechanism. But when there is overfishing of any particular fish that is very popular, then the price of that fish rises. Now, when the price of those fishes start rising in society, there is a perverse intense incentive for other fishermen to buy more trawlers and to go out and overfish. So the mechanism of price is unfortunately not something which is actually going to talk about whether climate change is going to be reducing or more. So these are the 2 points which I wanted to say, and I'll definitely talk about this to Dr. Rane when it happens. The third and the most important thing which I want to talk about is the solutions. You know, are there solutions? And Dr. Ranade said economic growth and the kind of economic growth. Of course, we need that. And he was very right when he said that in a country like India, we do need economic growth because for the simple reason that we need more taxes. We don't have justice. We don't have development, which is equitably distributed. And we need taxes. We need collection. And taxes are one of the strategically most important sources of finance for developing a country. Thus, what kind of economic growth do we need is the question that needs to be addressed. And the kind of economic growth that we need is a growth which is decoupled from natural resource extraction and a growth which is decoupled from environmental degradation. Is that possible? Of course, it is vehemently possible. Economic growth is possible without extraction, with reducing, which is called as relative decoupling of natural resources extraction and relative decoupling of environmental degradation. Both these cases are possible. We know they are possible in many ways, but I want to spend just a couple of minutes to talking about 3 cases. One is India needs to increase the value added per use of product, per use of resource. I'll give you an example. Let's assume there's a village which produces turmeric. Now, the village sells this raw turmeric to a city. The city processes the raw turmeric into dry turmeric powder, and the villagers buy the dry turmeric powder from the city, which means the GDP of that village is as much as the revenue they get from the raw turmeric. Now, imagine if they were to process this raw turmeric and make powder out of it and sell it, the GDP of that village increases. So increasing the value added per use of resource will increase the GDP without increasing the natural resource consumption. And if they were to extract curcumin out of that, then they would be able to increase the GDP far more. So that is one part. Second is increasing the number of times a resource is used in the economy, which is very simply put is called a circular economy. How many times can you take back that mineral, put it into the use, and then re-put it into that? And there are many ways to do that. One, of course, is recycling. But the other more important way which is coming up is servicization of products, which means not selling the product, but selling the product as a service. So, for example, when Cummins thought about not selling their generators, but leasing out their generators and selling the power that somebody makes from that, is a very viable way to to increase the revenues of that company without increasing the natural resource consumption of the company. They could just take it back. One of the most successful cases in the world was a company called Xerox. Xerox leased out its photocopiers, and after 3 years, it took back that photocopier. The company only paid for the photocopies, took back that photocopier, used most of the parts into the new technology, and gave it back to the company. Phenomenal recycling was possible for Xerox, and phenomenal savings in money, plus increase in revenue. This is possible. So increasing the value add per product, increasing the number of times you use a resource, and the third and last thing is increasing the renewable resource content in your economy. Right? And the biggest renewable resource content in our economy is agriculture. So if we are able today, agriculture contributes about 16% of the GDP in a sectoral contribution of GDP. If we are able to raise that output, we are also able to address the other problem of reducing farmer poverty. We've been talking about doubling farmer income, and the strategies about doubling farmer income have not yielded much result. But in all three cases, we will be able to increase the amount of GDP, which is increased, the revenue, growth in economy with a relative decoupling in natural resource use and environmental degradation. All these things are possible. And the last point I wanted to make, about 2-3 minutes left, is our renewable energy pathway. Right? The power sector and the transport sector are the two biggest emitters of greenhouse gases in the world. And every country in the world is scrambling towards, getting into solar, into windmills, into battery, electric vehicles, so on and so forth. Unfortunately, all of these renewable energy pathways need few critical minerals, right? About 10 or 12 critical minerals. Now, about 55% of these critical minerals are present only in 15 countries on the planet, which means we are going to be unreasonably dependent upon those countries which are able to get those. And in many of these, critical minerals lie in the permafrost region of Siberia, Mongolia, China, and of course, Southern America and things like that. So critical minerals are going to be the next or probably point of contention. The way we created OPEC and the Gulf countries a monopoly, we might create another monopoly in the critical mineral sector. India, unfortunately, has about 10 of these critical minerals. The stock is zero. We don't have them. We have to entirely depend upon other nations for these critical minerals. Thus, the path for India's renewable energy transition needs to be relooked at in the resource that we actually possess. And the resources that we actually possess are three: ample land, ample sunlight, and excellent knowledge about farming. These three critical resources can be put into getting back degraded and uncultivated lands into photosynthetic capacity, which means into the carbon cycle, and creating a decentralized model of biomass-based energy. And this is possible. We've been trying this out. In fact, we are now rolling out at least about 2 projects across India, where we will be able to cultivate biomass as a feedstock, convert it to energy. Again, there are 3 pathways to energy. We can either convert it to biomass briquettes or convert it to biogas, which is compressed biogas. And the third is hydrogen. All 3 pathways are possible. And India has got ample of these resources. So my contention here is, when we are talking about solutions, we need to relook at the way economic growth is structured, and we need to move towards a greener GDP. There is nothing like a green GDP. There could be greener. We could be doing something which is less black than what was yesterday. And the other thing is move into a renewable energy pathway where we have full control of our resources. And lastly, I saw the emotions come out from Professor Malik, and even now, and that also reminded me of Dr. Ranade said that this is Sahir Ludhianvi's Jayanti. And I remember these famous lines of Shahir Ludhianvi's. Kabhi halat pe, kabhi khud pe rona aaya. Baat nikli hai to har baat pe rona aaya. So we have to go beyond this rona aaya and to look at hope. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir, for giving us such an insightful discussion. Moving on to the industry panel discussion, moving towards lasting sustainability. Industries play a crucial role in shaping the future. This panel discussion will focus on how renewable energy, decarbonization, and technological innovations can drive long term sustainability. We are privileged to have with us Dr. Nitant Mate, Managing Director of Sea Green Technologies and a leading force in renewable energy solutions and sustainable technology. Mr. Mahesh Devdar, Head of PIC Center for Sustainable and Energy, Center for Sustainable Energy and Mobility. With his extensive experience in renewable energy and electrification, he is committed to shaping policies and technologies that drive India's transition to low carbon economy. Mr. Milan Nag, Chairman of KK Nag Private Limited. He is an industrial leader in sustainable business practices, pioneering in eco-friendly materials and circular economy solutions in India. His company has been instrumental in reducing industrial carbon footprints by integrating green manufacturing process and energy efficient technologies. We lastly also have Mr. Shantanu Pandit, CII Chair for Climate Change. Mr. Shantanu is an impact driven entrepreneur leading the charge in industrial decarbonization and energy efficiency. As a trusted digitalization partner of Siemens, he focuses on smart energy monitoring, automation, and power optimization, ensuring industry's transition toward a cleaner and more efficient energy system. Moderating this discussion with us, we have Dr. Gurudas Nulkar, a leading voice in industrial sustainability and ecological economics. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and help me in welcoming these panelists. Thank you.
Good evening once again, and here we are back again. I love that song by Backstreet Boys. So it starts with that, here we are back again. I think this is going to be a very interesting panel discussion because we have a mix of people who are working in the industry, youth who are part of industry, and also Mahesh, as well as Nitant, who have been in industry as well as in policy and thinking. This is what I plan to do. I would request each panelist to start off with a brief argument for about 3 to 4 minutes, right? And then we will go in for a cross questioning. So it's not just me who's asking the questions, but the others are free to ask each other. So that will give a more of an open kind of thing, right? And I'll start with the youngest of the lot, Shantanu. The mic is for you. 3 minutes.
Hello. Yeah. Good evening. Absolutely, it's after post lunch, so a little energy drop, I guess. But okay, it's industry, so it's more of energy, and definitely we consume a lot of energy. So myself, I'm Shantanu Pandit. Uh, I lead the climate change vertical with CII, and we have a lot of initiatives with YI as a vertical. So one of them is the important and most impactful is green infrastructure, where if an industry is green, definitely we have a lot of decarbonization to be done. And also when I run a company where we do energy efficiency for industries and we see the approach of industries. So I would really like to highlight the approach of industries where when we go as partners or we go as solution sellers, the approach is very different. They don't want it. Basically, it's a luxury rate today. But when it comes to sustainability as a topic, and it's a buzzword today, now it's an alarm. Now they want it. So there's something which is called as energy efficiency, where power quality matters. It impacts the power generations as well. So let's work on that. Let's start a dialogue on that where with the industry itself, where the power quality issues are huge. Today, when one industry is consuming power, are they really utilizing those power kWh units efficiently? Definitely no, there's a wastage. And to highlight energy, it's a very fundamental law that it's conversion. So energy cannot be destroyed, it cannot be created. It is a conversion. So energy, which is electricity, is converted to heat, or it's a waste. So can we identify that waste? Yes, we can. There is technology. There are monitoring systems today where we can map these wastages. So I guess that's what I really want to start with the climate change perspective, because that's a very interesting thing and it has a impact, it has a measure. We can definitely lower it to 20% of that industrial carbon decarbonization. So
Thanks. Thanks for that perspective. Milan? Sure.
Good evening, everyone. I represent Kekinag Private Limited, which is a plastic processing company. And we are mainly into foams. So we do thermocol, which is the most vanilla item. We do a close cousin of thermocol, if you will, called expanded polypropylene, which is used for automobile components. And we also do rotational molding, which for the unfamiliar, it's these large hollow plastic items, like Syntex tanks being the most common product that you see in rotational molding in our country. But we do other stuff as well in using that process. So I come from the plastics industry, and then to be at a sustainability conference is almost like a contradiction. Or at least that's what it seems like to most people, because there's so much hysteria about plastics. And therefore, I need your indulgence, Dr. Nulkar. I may take a little bit more than 3 minutes because I need to explain my position. Plastics is now quite a bad word. And even school children are taught that plastics are bad. You have these glamorous actresses who grab these unsuspecting school kids and give them placards and say no to plastics. And but a lot of it stems from ignorance, because one can't just wish away plastics. You encounter them from the moment you wake up in the morning. For example, you pick up the first thing you do is pick up your toothbrush. The handle is made of plastics. The bristles are made of plastic. Your toothpaste tube is made of plastic. You use shampoo. You use the conditioner. The containers are made of plastic. Your soap dispenser, your hairbrush. If you use a razor, if it's disposable, then it's entirely made of plastic. If you use otherwise, the handle is made of plastic. If you use contact lenses, your case is made of plastic. If you use makeup, your makeup container is made of plastic. Your deodorant stick is made of plastic. Even your clothing, there's a lot of spandex and polyester and nylon that goes into clothing these days, and that's all plastic. And you haven't even reached the breakfast table yet. So, I mean, you've got plastic galore. You can't escape them. Plastics are ubiquitous. They're, pervasive, omnipresent. They're literally everywhere. But having said all of that, we have to admit that we do have a problem. And there are at least 4 issues with plastics. Firstly, they're generally sourced from non-renewable resources. Secondly, when converting them from raw materials to finished products, energy is used, albeit I would argue that the energy used is less than in for converting many of the competing materials. And there is, of course, like with most manufacturing processes, there would be some adverse impact on air and water, for example. Then generally they're not, that's the third problem, they're generally not biodegradable. And I think this is the issue that has brought this whole no to plastics movement about, because they do not break down and integrate back into nature at the end of their useful lives. But most plastics that we use are what are called thermoplastics. There are 2 types of plastics, thermoplastics and thermosets. Thermosets cannot be recycled, but thermoplastics, which is the vast majority of the normal plastics we use, can be recycled. So they're not meant to be put into landfills. They're meant to be reused and recycled. But that's the 4th problem, that we do not reuse and recycle as much as we should be. So awareness of the importance of sustainability has, of course, been growing in society over the last several years. And that has been happening in our company as well. One of the first things we did was to rewrite our purpose. And it was reworded to say that Kekinag Private Limited is an ethical and innovative leader in the plastics industry, committed to environmental sustainability. when trying to figure out how we could actualize this statement of purpose, we decided that as a smaller company with limited resources, we will concentrate on problems number 2, which I described, which is namely reducing energy consumption and adverse environmental impact during the production process, and problem number 4, which is increasing the recycling of used EPS. We have 6 locations, and in each, there were individual efforts that were being made to conserve energy, reduce waste, etc. But the impact was being dissipated as we did not have a focused approach. To give the effort some thrust and coherence, we realized we needed to work in a structured manner and were fortunate to come across CII's GreenCo rating system. GreenCo is the first and only framework available anywhere in the world that evaluates companies on the environmental friendliness of their activities using a life cycle approach. It has 8 modules: energy efficiency, water conservation, renewable energy, greenhouse gases, waste management, material conservation, recycling and recyclability, green supply chain, green infrastructure, and ecology. A factory's track record is evaluated to assess how it has improved in each of these 8 areas over the past 3 years. 5 of our 6 plants were eligible to be rated. The 6th plant couldn't be rated because it was just a year old at that time, and we needed 3 years data to be eligible. And I'm proud to say that of our 5 plants, 3 were awarded gold ratings and 2 got silver ratings. But the ratings per se was not what was important. The biggest benefit we got was with how much more efficient our operations became. Many of our senior managers were aghast at the amount of money we were spending to comply with the requirements of GreenCo. But I can say with certainty that it was all money well spent. Not only did it all pay back within a year, but those savings are now permanent and we'll realize them year after year. So happily, GreenCo not only makes good environmental sense, it also makes very good business sense.
Yes. So if we could take more of this in the later part of it.
Sure.
After the initial part.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Sure.
With questions. I think these are very inspiring stories, and stories which say that, you know, these are not expenses which are not wasted in you know, something which is going to be useful for the future generations, but this is actually expenditure which is going to be much more, making you much more competitive. Yeah, right. So I think the message is very clear from that. Mahesh, may I request you to go ahead with your initial?
Great. So I'll just take it forward from where Gurudas left. He talked about 2 things. First is the solutions part of it. We also want to talk about solutions. The second aspect is he talked about the critical mineral, role of critical mineral. And he talked about how we have ample land, sun, and farming practices, which will really help us to be self-sufficient in terms of energy. I want to propose that nuclear is another important aspect from that angle as well. Where we have the indigenous source of technology. Now we have developed that a lot. So I just want to make a case for nuclear energy, and especially the role of small modular reactor in the industrial sector. So just some brief, brief about nuclear fission. All of us, we know, we all have played carom, right? So we put the striker and the coins kind of get it. This thing, it's very similar. There is a neutron that gets bombarded onto a nucleus of a radioactive atom like uranium-235. It gets broken, the nucleus gets split into 2 components, not unlike the carom board where you have multiple coins going on. There are typically 2 components, barium and krypton. And then there are 3 more neutrons that come out and they kind of go and hit the other atoms of uranium. And that's how the chain reaction, as we call it, starts. And, you know, the nuclear energy gets generated. So while this is all happening, we also need to know that, there are a lot of myths and, challenges around the way people perceive nuclear energy, and we'll clear some of those in the subsequent discussions. But I also want to make a case that although we are very proud of our scientists and we talk highly about the prowess of our nuclear scientists, but to be very honest, we have not done as good as we would have liked in the last 70 years. Dr. Homi Bhabha presented his 3-stage nuclear cycle back in 58. he actually suggested that we will reach around 8 gigawatt of nuclear generation by 1980. Here we are in 2025, and we are around 7.4 gigawatt in in our overall capacity. If you just put the number, I'm going to share a lot of numbers. It's just 1.7% of our total installed capacity in India. Just in terms of the percentage of nuclear generation, we are 30th in the rank of countries. Forget about China, which started around our same time. They are around 57 gigawatt in nuclear. Even Pakistan, they are having 17% of their energy coming from nuclear sources. So we have lagged a lot. Nothing to do with our scientists. Of course, we had our restrictions when we did our tests, nuclear tests back in 74 and 98. But in spite of that, we as a country have not really lived to the expectation that nuclear as a source gives us, and also what we can do with it. Even countries like UAE, which started their journey around 15 years back, they are around 5.3 gigawatt, and here we are at 7.4 gigawatt. So a lot needs to be done in that space, and lot can be done. Again, from the critical mineral, I just want to add just one more point, and then I'll just stop, and then we'll do a lot of question answer. Hopefully, I'm sure you will have a lot of questions. But in terms of the indigenous sources, so uranium-235, we have natural uranium, very small quantity, we mostly export it. But apart from that, there also we are trying to overcome that challenge of mineral availability by focusing our energy on energy in both sense, but focusing on energy on thorium, which is abundant. We are the topmost reserves of thorium, almost 1 million ton in India. So that is one area that we are focusing. All the technologies now, we have already developed that. We use the pressurized heavy water reactor mostly. We have around 22 reactors operating in India. And then we have mastered that technology. So we are at that stage. Now we can really build on top of this capability that we have. And we really need to take it to the next level. Because again, just few numbers and then I'll close. Currently we are around 1500 to 1600 terawatt hour of electricity needs that we have expected to with our economic growth and rest of the things and the cooling load that's going to go up. It is going to go around 6500 terawatt hour by 2047 when we have our Viksit Bharat dream. And currently our installed capacity is around 440 gigawatt. It is expected to go to around 3500 to 4000 gigawatt. Out of that, even if you look at all the renewable sources, including solar, wind, hydro, we'll not be able to cross more than, 1500 to 1700 gigawatts. So it's a huge shortfall that we have. And the low carbon nuclear has to play a key role in that energy landscape of 2047. So I'll just take a pause at this point of time. We'll of course discuss more questions later. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I think, these are very important figures we need to look at. Nitant, I think you are also from the power sector and you have worked a lot in that. So if you could give your opening statements, please.
Hi. Okay. So basically, I'm a hardcore mechanical engineer, but I converted to renewable energy in 1987. And since then, I've been working on that. I started as a solar guy working on solar energy. And then now I'm kind of an advocate of everything renewable. So essentially, the only source of energy that we have outside of the earth, which is giving energy to us, is sun. And so any efficient way to harness the sun is the right way of doing things. And that is why when I say that I went to entire solar, that means you talk about bioenergy, it is solar. You talk about wind energy, it is solar. You talk about hydro energy, it is solar. And of course, solar photovoltaic and solar thermal are the known direct forms of solar energy utilization. So the future of energy, as I see in India, is a network of smart microgrids of hybrids of renewable energy. Okay. So basically, decentralized. When Priyadarshini was talking, she talked about decentralized. Renewable energy, solar energy is available in a decentralized manner. And unfortunately, our conventional wisdom after industrialization always has been to centralize everything, make it bigger so that cost per unit goes down. So the idea in renewable energy is work with the smallest possible viable capacity and then multiply those. Instead of increasing the capacity, you increase the numbers. And that is a very, very good strategy of insurance. So for example, I'll give you an example of biodiesel plants. Biodiesel was a buzzword a decade ago, or maybe a couple of decades ago in the world over. And everybody started talking about biodiesel, saying that, look, waste oil, we would be converting that to biodiesel. Waste bio oil, we can convert to biodiesel. And then there were plants, people commissioned plants of like 1 million tons a year. That means 300 tons of biodiesel produced every day. So that means you have to have 300 tons of raw material of waste vegetable oil coming to that factory. And then you convert that. And then you create biodiesel, which is almost close to 300,000 liters. And then you have to sell that 300,000 liters. So you have to transport that biodiesel back to places of consumption. So that is quite stupid. And most of these plants failed for a number of reasons. I will not go into details of that, but that is something that we have to keep in mind. So it is decentralized source. The future of energy is going to be in hybrids of renewable energy microgrids, which are smart, which can import, export energy to the grid next to it or grids next to it. And that is how it is going to be. Another thing is, this is going to be rural centric. And that is why the money that flows from rural areas, from cities abroad, is actually going to go other way around. From cities, the money is going to go to rural areas. And that is really Atmanirbhar Bharat, self-reliance, all those things are going to be possible because of that. And renewable energy will have very large component of bioenergy. Because of that, there are a number of ways. Gurudas mentioned that you can get energy from biomass. And one of the ways is to ferment the biomass into biogas. So when you do that, you are actually recycling all the micronutrients and the organic carbon back into the land. So you can use the same piece of land over and over again, really sustainably. And that is the way you would probably be able to do that. Another thing is, when you are looking at energy problem with renewable energy solutions and a hybrid grid solution, kind of gives you a possibility of working with energy, food, water, waste, and health, everything put together. So it gives you a possibility of having holistic approach to solve your problems. I'll stop there.
Yeah. Thanks so much. And we have about 24 minutes. That laptop is continuously staring at me when when you're answering. So I would like to ask the first set of questions to each one of you, and I would like you to be focused on that answer. So Shantanu, one of the things which I said earlier was increasing the value per use of resource. And that is something which you've been doing all along in CII, which means you're trying to reduce the energy consumption without reducing the output of a factory, right? And that's the way that you plan to improve HVAC, you have to plan to improve the power factors and so on and so forth. So can you tell us something? So it's quite obvious, businesses save money when they save energy, right? So that's a very strong incentive for them to do that. But is there any incentive to go beyond the obvious profitability factor that you have come across?
So in 2018, MSc had a directive straight away in the bill itself, in the month of April, that once you save power factor or you improve power factor to unity, you get an incentive of 7% in the bill. So if it is in the policy itself from the government or from the governmental agencies, industries really act on it. So when we used to approach industries for improving the power factor earlier to the bill, so it was a luxury, they never implemented it. But now, since they have incentives, then there was a demand which was for the power factor improvement. And then now today, again, there's a new bill which passed was for the AVH billing. Now you don't know where the power, really is getting wasted or it is getting utilized. So it is a KVH billing which is being done today. So it was done in the month of somewhere around April 2020. now it's a real challenge for the industries, like how I have to improve my existing efficiency. So when I talk about KVH, I don't really know exactly where my energy is wastage. So I need to do something which is called as some energy monitoring has to be done. We need to map the energies. We need to see where there is wastage, because again, waste is a waste. It's a national waste. If you are really saving that, then definitely there is an impact back end on the thermal power generation, because we are reliant on that. Solar, okay, so my approach is, rather than going for additional renewables, additional energies, existing energy has to be saved. That's the fundamental. If that is done, then the second step is you go for the renewables, you go with the second source of power. But yeah, incentives, government really has incentives. Now, we also talk about harmonics in the system. The government has started, or the MSCDCL has started getting notified letters to the industries that now your harmonic levels are high. You need to get it in a lower level and save power, basically. So there are incentives, and the incentive is in the balance sheet directly, because you're saving power and you're saving on the energy. And per kg, if there is some amount of energy which is consumed, some kWh amount of energy is consumed, if you're efficient enough, then your definite per kg output is reduced.
Yeah,
So the energy is reduced.
So that's
a tangible.
That's reducing the difference between output and input,
Absolutely.
which is including value add. So, Milan, one of the things which we heard you very clearly say is that doing good to the planet has also been useful for your business, right? And you did a Green Co rating, CII, and he's also from CII. And you've already talked about how CII has kind of been a transformational agent for Indian industry. And you've been in business for long. KK Nag has been a pioneer in that. Would you kind of think about ways where sustainability, I have actually two questions for you. Would you think about ways of sustainability outside your gate, which is a little harder to see and which is directly not going to impact your balance sheet, as a means of improving your competitive advantage? One question. And the second is, would these new norms of EPR, extended producer responsibility, reduce your competitiveness or your profitability?
We actually the two are related in our case, because what happened was we plastics were getting a bum rap. EPS was getting a worse reputation than the rest of the plastics, because you found EPS thrown all over the streets and in water bodies and all that sort of stuff. So we started thinking about this maybe 6 or 7 years ago. We had imported many years ago, about 15 or 20 years ago, we had imported some very sophisticated machinery from Denmark when our rejections were very high, to recycle, to reprocess the rejections and put them back into our process. But then with TQM and all these sorts of moves, our rejections came down to a very, very low level, and these machines were just idling. And so the societal impact, we thought that what we could do is collect all the waste EPS. So we made a pledge that we didn't in the streets, we didn't want to see any, we called it thermocol because that's what it's known as colloquially. We didn't want to see any thermocol thrown on our streets, or the streets, rivers, or the garbage dumps of Pune. Yeah, that was the pledge we took. So we tied up with PMC. And we had a tripartite agreement with PMC and Swatch, because initially we were trying to collect it ourselves, and that was just not viable. So then the Swatch workers were collecting all the thermocol from homes, consolidating it at their at every street. They've got a little station, and our trucks were doing still do a milk run around Pune all through the day, picking up this stuff as it's consolidated everywhere. Then it would come back to our factory. We put it into these machines, recycle it, and shove it back into the product as in place of virgin material. To answer your second question, EPR now mandates from the 1st of April that all EPS packaging products have to have 10% recycled content, right? Now, most people, when they recycle EPS, most other people, what they were doing was just burning it. Yeah, which is actually downcycling it, because they make it from a expandable polystyrene to GPPS to make all these cheap plastic items. So our process is actually recycling it, and we've been doing it for years. So for us, it's actually going to be quite easy to meet these EPR norms. And I think, did you ask for the economic aspect of it? Yeah. So there are two aspects. Obviously, there's a cost of collecting the EPS from somewhere and then reprocessing it. And then there's a saving because you're saving on virgin material to that extent. So you've just got to do it right. You've got to get the economics right and make sure that your costs are less than your saving.
So I think we have both the examples of what I talked before. One is, how do you increase the value per use? And what you talked about, how do you increase the number of times you're using the same resource? So both examples sitting here and thanks so much. I think, and this is what you just said is a great example of going sustainability beyond your gate. You tied up with Swatch, with PMC, you had no business to do that, right? But that was going to affect your critical raw material, and that's how you came. So thanks for that. Before I come to Mahesh, I want to go to Nitant first because Nitant will set the context for what Mahesh has to say. Nitant, and you have devised a very good scheme of, before even Atmanirbhar was a buzzword, you had talked about how a village can be Atmanirbhar in terms of energy and water through a decentralized model. Can you explain that, and how is it really practical, or is it just a conceptual model?
Actually, everything starts as a dream. Okay. So when you start talking about it, it's like everybody would say he's a dreamer. So for example, if I were to dream, I will start saying that, look, every village in India can be a net energy exporter and net exporter of food and net exporter of fertilizer. And this is possible because the kind of natural resource we have. Solar energy available in India is on an average about 5.5 kilowatt hours per square meter per day. Okay. So if you look at it that way, then the amount of solar energy you get in a day on India is enough to support India for next 7.5 years. Okay. So there's no dearth of energy. Now the problem is how we can manage that. Second aspect, when it comes to biofuels, it is very important that you convert that solar energy through photosynthesis into some biomass. So capture that carbon dioxide and water. So carbon dioxide, there is plenty. I mean, we are talking about that to be a problem. So that is not our problem. Do we have enough water? Now, average is a very funny number, but I'm going to talk about average. So average rainfall on land of India is about 1050 millimeters, more than 1 meter. 3.28 million square kilometers is our land area. So if you do some back of the envelope calculations and say that, look, that much rain falls, we are not able to manage that. Maybe 50% of that water is going to go, rest 50% of water, we can allow it to seep, allow it to be in small dams, check dams, whatever, and we are able to use that. So if you do that, you can have 3 crop cycles. On the entire cultivable land of India, which is about 70% of India's area. You were talking about fallow lands and bringing them back to photosynthesis. This is absolutely possible. Numbers, these are engineers' numbers, not farmers' numbers. Okay. So numbers can very clearly say that it is possible. Now, so if you do that, then there is enough availability of sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide. So enough availability of biomass is possible. So every crop that you have, grain, so about 260, 300 million tons is what we produce in terms of grain every year. Now, if you look at that grain production, if you have maize, then every kilogram of maize that you get, you have 2 kilograms of plant. So if you are wheat, every kilogram of wheat you have 1 kilogram of plant. Rice is same. Sorghum, it's again 1:2. So there is enough biomass available as waste from the farming itself. But if you decide to cultivate, then you can cultivate varieties like Napier grass, which is absolutely possible. I mean, people talk about any random numbers, but to be realistic, about 300 tons of fresh biomass per acre per year is possible. Okay. 400 tons is the theoretical limit for the type of grass that we are talking about. And 300 tons of fresh biomass is wet biomass. So if it is dry biomass, it is like 25% for the back of the envelope calculations. 27, 28% solids is what it has. But 300 tons will give you 75 tons of biomass. Now, how does it compare with farming biomass? If you're talking about, say, if you're talking about a crop that is going to give you more biomass, like maize, then you will probably get about 4 tons of dry biomass per year from a maize crop. Okay. But that same acre will give you about 75 tons. So if you are trying to maximize energy availability, then you are able to do that with this. Now I'm going to cut short and give you the answer of what you are looking at. So basically it is possible that you can cultivate and create biomass and then convert that biomass to energy. Now, different routes are there. One of the routes of converting biomass to energy would be biogas. And when you're doing biogas, the gas comes out and the slurry also comes out. So when the slurry comes out, it gives you fertilizer. So you're giving it back to the ground. Now that is one way. So that way you are saving actually import of chemical fertilizers. Okay, so that is economically definitely a good activity. Also giving the micronutrients back. Now, second is energy. Now, if you go biogas route, then you have possibility of using the gas as fuel for cooking, for industrial heating and things like that. And you also are able to convert that gas into electricity to the generator, which is these are all proven processes. Okay, so that's not a problem. Now, third thing is, so basically you want electricity for the village and you want electricity, excess electricity that can be sold. So that is possible, depending on the sizing is the most important thing. Now, the third aspect is, what is the mix of electricity generation? So there is solar availability, so you can have solar photovoltaic. And then you have biogas. So what will you do? So ideally, I would go maximize on biogas. Okay, because the availability of raw materials that you were talking about, solar cells, that is one thing. And second, when I am operating a generator, it's a very conventional technology, but there is waste heat available. So the waste heat can be also used as process heat, and waste heat also can be used as an effective thing for generating cooling, because cooling is a very important thing. In India, there is a problem that farm produce is not processed or not stored at the farm gate. And if that happens, about 40% of our farm produce actually goes waste.
Yeah. Okay. So for want of time, I'm going to stop you there. Thanks for that. And also the other point that you always say that for storing gas, you don't need any critical minerals like you need to store energy, electricity, battery. But coming to Mahesh, and Mahesh, I'm just taking up from where Nitant left off. For Nitant, we talked about Atmanirbhar village, and you've been a great advocate of using smart grids as a means of reducing electricity demand, right? And you've been talking about how smart grids can be used in institutional campuses or residential colonies and things like that. What exactly is the concept behind that, and what do you think would be the cumulative effect on, let's say, a city like Pune, if more housing societies come up with smart grids?
Sure. So I think smart grid is a technology which basically, it's not just one monolithic technology. It's a collection of multiple different technologies working closely together. And that's how it works. Just going back to Nitant's point, the distributed energy sources is the need of the hour. And nuclear, by the way, the small modular reactor is also one way of distributed energy generation, especially for the industrial areas where it's not just the electricity, but also the process heat that they need at different levels. So small modular reactor provides you the electricity as well as the heat. That can be one generation component into microgrid. Now, microgrid contains all these generation components, whether it's a nuclear small modular reactor, whether it's a solar, whether it's wind, biogas. So these are all generation, components. There are also different, storage components, because especially if you are using energy like solar and wind, these are intermittent sources. So you got to store it, because you can't, in industry or in a housing society, you can't say now it's the evening and I don't have enough energy. Storage is important. One more important aspect that we talked about, efficiency is one area, but the other is we are always looking at energy, from the supply side. There is a huge potential from demand side. We have to manage our demand well. We have to, so gone are the days when we used to have certain demand, and to fulfill that demand, we used to create the source. So it is always generation used to follow demand. Now it's the other way around. Now we have generation sources, solar, wind. How do we manage our demand in line with the generation? So now demand has to follow. So demand management services, there is a thing called demand response. These are all important components of new energy equation. Now, these are all different things. And as Nitant was rightly pointing out, the controller. Now, these are all different sources of energy. How do you control across all these different sources? When the solar energy is at its peak during the daytime, can you store a part of it in the storage device? Can you use that later in the day? Can you cut down your demand? Critical demand will have to continue. But in industry also, there might be some non-critical demand. Can you cut it down later in the evening so that your demand matches the supply? So the smart microgrid is essentially, absolutely. It's essentially working across all these different sources, coordinate across all these different sources, and then do a job which the traditional grids used to do. And the traditional grids have their huge challenges. We always talk about the distributed sources.
And also talk to the next grid.
And
And that's also very important.
And transmission losses, the distribution losses, there are huge challenges with the traditional grid. So these are the smart grids which are coming up, where it's a smart grid of that for that particular consumption. All these different sources coordinate and work with each other. They talk to other smart grids, and together then they service the requirement, the energy requirement that we have. So that's the concept that
Yeah, thanks. I think that's interesting. We have exactly 6 minutes left. And like I promised, I would like to open the panelists to ask questions to each other if you have. That would be an interesting thing to look at each other's perspectives. So first you get to ask each other questions if you have. Otherwise, we'll go to the audience.
I think from my perspective, I think there are a lot of misconceptions about overall nuclear, SMR and things like that. So if any of you have any, because there is radiation and nuclear waste and wo kaise manage karenge, and
not in my backyard.
We have all, not in my NIMBY, not in my backyard, as they say. Simpsons, right? We have all seen Simpsons.
Yeah.
And we see that green ooze that comes out from the trees and say, yaar, kaise hone wala hai? So, there are a lot of misconceptions. So any of you have any misconception, more than happy to discuss right now, even later on as well.
Actually, you have asked the question, so answer it.
Yeah, so radiation is not an issue. I just want to highlight that there is an excellent book by an Indian nuclear scientist called Dr. Arun Nayak. If you are worried about radiation, please pick it up. Please, absolutely, right now, everything, even bananas, there is potassium which is radioactive, of course, in very minute quantity, but radioactivity is all around us. The dosage of radiation is what we are worried about. Even outside the nuclear plants, the dosage, there is a unit called sievert. It's the unit which says how much is the biological impact on the human cells. It's found that it is really negligible, around 2 to 3 millisievert. Sievert is a big unit, millisievert. The radiation CT scan ke liye hum log gaye apne regular checkup ke liye, we have 15 to 20 millisievert that we can. So I think radiation is not that a challenge. X-rays, absolutely. X-rays, CT scans, all these are radiation. Even the watches, sometimes we have this, so radiation is everywhere. Of course, how do we manage and how do we avoid the accidents? Completely understood, but it is manageable risk and we should work towards that. So I just wanted to.
And I think Professor Malik has been a big proponent of small nuclear reactors.
I have a question.
Yeah.
From Mr. Mahesh. So basically, it's a very unorganized question. It's a very, so nuclear generation has energy as well as heat, right? In industry, 40% of the energy is utilized for heat. 60% is utilized for its cooling. So when we say heat, how can it be utilized? Or what is the utilization factor? And
So the way it works is basically, after the nuclear reaction happens, basically that water gets, it's a steam turbine standard, technology. That steam gets generated, the steam gets used. The steam typically gets condensed again, and it is again used. It's a closed loop cycle. So the idea is that heat that gets generated, especially for low heat applications, which is around 400 degrees Celsius. These are all low heat applications, including the desalination and things like that. So that's where what essentially you do is, again, the waste heat that you have. After you run your turbine, the steam is used to run the turbine. You collect that heat, you use it, you transfer it to wherever you want, and use it. And that's the whole idea of using SMRs for industrial applications. So nuclear generation, the workhorses are like 1.6 gigawatt reactor, 1 gigawatt reactor, but the small modular reactor are 300, 200, 300 megawatt. So for an industry, it's an ideal, source where you use the electricity, use that waste heat, and use it to your, manage your processes. So that's the idea there.
That's a good. Amit is
Actually-
standing there with a question in his hand. So Amit, go ahead.
First question for Mahesh. It's we've got a requirement of about 1,000 gigawatt, I think, with the future projections. Right now, we produce about 440 gigawatt or 500 gigawatt. 70% of that is coal. If you want to replace that with nuclear, and I know the technology exists, even if it's terawatt power or whatever you want to replace it with, have you figured out the cost implication of maybe replacing 500 gigawatt with nuclear? Have you considered geothermal as an option for repurposing 70% of what we're sourcing from coal into geothermal? Have these cost economics been considered? And if they are considered, are there projections as to when we can get this up and running? One question for Nitant. I used your data, which you gave up in the 2019 PIC report, where you figured out Pune's baseline emissions at about 2.6 crore emission tons. I think you figured out that it was about 3 crore emission tons by 2025. I don't know if you guys have run the math backward, but are you still sticking true to those numbers, or how does that work? One question for Milan. Pune has about 2,500 tons of trash it produces every day. 500 tons out of that is plastic every single day. Have you done any math in terms of figuring out even if you can repurpose 100 tons out of that every day with Kekinag? Maybe start with 10 tons, go up to 100, scale it up till we maybe take the renewables out of the system. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I don't think we have enough time. It's just 36 seconds for the three of you to answer, which is impossible. So I would suggest, Amit, that we will take the questions, and they need answers, but we will talk to you individually because not everybody might be interested in answering that. So let's take them up offline in that, right? And I think it's exactly 60 seconds, which is a good time for me to say thank you to all four of you. You get about 4 seconds of thank you from me. And this has been a good panel. I believe the audience is also enriched by your experience. Thank you so much.
Like to add something to this, since we are talking about climate change and the impacts. So with CII-YI as an initiative as green infrastructure, so we came across this Nakshatra one. Okay, so planting 27 trees in 2,000 square feet of land. So let's, we have people, I have the audience, I have such esteemed panelists. And so if we can promote this, it's just planting trees. And if you're able to contribute it towards the greener tomorrow, then please, it's my request to everyone to plant 27 trees and call it a Nakshatra one. It has a spiritual backup to it as well. So people will definitely take care of the trees. Thank you.
Thanks.
I'd request our Director PIC, Major General Nitin Gadkari, to kindly provide the panelists with a token of appreciation. I'd kindly. I'd kindly request Dr. Gurudas sir and Major General Nitin Gadkari to please be on the stage. It is my privilege to introduce you Major General Nitin Gadkari, the Director of PIC, a distinguished veteran of the Indian Army with 37 years of service. Currently serving as the Director of Pune International Center with a career dedicated to national service. Major General Gadkari has brought his leadership and strategic expertise to key initiatives at PIC, contributing to policy discussions on national security, governance, and development. His experience and insights continue to shape thought leadership at PIC, making him an invaluable asset to the organization and beyond. He has also authored an outstanding Indian book named Outstanding Indian Achievers and Their Quest for an Atmanirbhar Bharat, reflecting his commitment to India's self-reliance. We are honored to have him with us today. Please join me in welcoming Major General Nitin Gadkari.
Hello. Yeah. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I feel like an externality that Dr. Anade was talking about. Something which is unintended, but it happens. So I'm neither an expert on environment nor a speaker, but then I'm the director here. So I've been asked to conclude the session. Thankfully, Gurdas is with me, so he'll help me out. So the good part about conclusion always is, if you don't say anything, people will say there was nothing to say, so it's all right. If you say something, you say he said the same thing what others said, nothing new. So please bear with me. What I think we should do is, I have noted down some key sentences or whatever you may say from speakers. I just read them out, and then you possibly could take them from there. Maybe being from the armed forces, I'll add a word or two about what does the armed forces do for environment. Okay, as I was sitting, I was noting down, knowing very well that the evening my turn is coming. So there are some sentences which I thought are catchy, so I picked them up. And the first came from none less than Dr. Mashelkar. And it says, it's not the crisis of nature, it's the crisis of leadership. I don't think there could be a more telling sentence. It's not a distant, slow motion, catastrophic. It's a crisis, and it is now. It's a distant, slow moving, catastrophic crisis, and it is happening now. Coming to Shri Madhav Gadgil, he spoke so beautifully about everything, but one thing that struck me much is India is the aerosol capital of the world, which leads to water vapor, which leads to more rain in shorter periods, which leads to intense floods, landslides, breaches of bunds, and collapsing of buildings. That TV image can never go out from your mind. Coming to Dr. Krishnan, 45% increase in greenhouse gases has taken place in the last 20 years, and India is the third most largest contributor. 1 degree rise in temperature
will increase rainfall by 7%. Coming to Dr. Ranade, and I was feeling guilty all the while sitting here. I think he was quoted out of context. I like to defend him since he's not here. He did not mean that in terms so much of climate change as an externality which happens to anyone. What even Mahesh referred to as radioactivity, everyone emits. It was in the same sense. He was quoted out of context, I think, and whosoever said that may please reconsider. But what he said was very novel. And zero growth concept surely is novel, but surely something that we all need to think about. It's probably one of the ways to mitigate the damage that we already done. Then is the examples of Netherlands, Sweden, 110% of wastage, that means 10% importing of wastage and treating it. And the most telling of his was stealing not from the younger generation, but from the ones who are unborn. Those who still have to come. And the three words of morality, justice, and fairness. Then was the panel discussion, which brought out so many ideas for societal response. Rural areas, climate change and its measure affect the poor people first. And they are never taken into consideration when policy changes are made. Women are one of the worst affected due to anything, whether it's climate change or policy due to climate change, and gender never figures as a factor in taking policy decisions. I think it's a very telling statement again. There was a suggestion of credit system somewhere from the audience, incentivizing of credits. And I think it's my opinion that without incentive, nothing will work. Somewhere we have to think of incentivizing every climate change initiative that we do, starting from our home. It came out later in the last panel discussion also. The next, Aditi Kale, prepare for new uncertainties. Mental and psychological impact of not only climate change, but also the measures taken due to climate change. Very, very obvious. Very obvious, and yet it never figures into any discussions. Conscious consumerism, a word that I picked up, conscious consumerism. Anaga Paranspe, I think the one who commented on Dr. Ajit Ranade, but she made some very valid. No, it was not that. She was talking on urbanization. I think she had some disagreement coming from the house. And she was talking about how urbanization is growing so rapid that today we are about 36%, and another 20 years later would be 50% coming from 530 million to 900 million people living in urban cities. And there is an acute shortage or shortfall of urban data. We are talking about urbanization, as she says all the time, but we have no statistics, no data to prove whether we are right, wrong, good, bad, ugly. Priyadarshini Karve, she made some very valid points, and the points which even Dr. Rana made or somebody else made, that politics is fueled by oil companies and climate change is a function of politics. So how do we control oil companies and their influence on politics? That was what she was talking about, climate injustice that is happening. Finally, this total sustainability. Gurdas made an excellent commentary on economics and how climate change can be looked at from economics point of view. And probably one of the most engaging conversations or engaging speech was given by Milton Nag. Is that Milton? Milan Nag, coming from the plastic industry. And he said it as much, he accepted it that plastics is a no-no word today, but probably it's a matter of perception. and that there is a plastic, there is bad plastic, and the good plastic can be recycled and can be used. And he gave that example of how machineries were imported from Netherlands, Denmark, and subsequently how they were used to uh, refurbish or recycle thermocol, which is collected from the streets of Pune, from rivers and houses, and the initiative that this company had taken. Very laudable. Nitan's comment that everyone is a dreamer, I like that. Solar energy is sufficient in India, and if we use only solar energy, India can sustain for another 7.5 years. Another statement, very strong statement, I would say. And finally, Mahesh, who made an excellent case on small modular nuclear reactors, plants, and coming from defense, I know both the importance, use, and how much we can use it in civilian form. And I totally agree with you as to they should be used. But the more valid point you made was there cannot be a single source of energy that you can rely on. It has to be a composite whole, and demand management, that I don't know whether you made that point. The demand management is going to become one of the major important functions as to how do you cater for demand, and not only the supply side. It has to be the demand side that needs to be looked at as we go ahead in future. And I thought that's what summed up the entire discussions and debate today. If I missed out anything, I request Gurdas to.
No, I think you did a great comprehensive job of summarizing that, and I have nothing to add except just one sentence. We many times as a developing nation we hide behind the fact saying that our per capita consumption of fossil fuel is still very low. Our per capita consumption of energy is low. We generate the least amount of waste per capita, so on and so forth. We have seen these arguments come by, but in this conference of climate emergency, I want to make this point that for the planet, it's aggregate which matters, not per capita. And as a country, we are huge. So that is the climate emergency that we are facing. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Sir and Gurudas Sir, for providing us and providing us a summary of discussions. Now, I would like to invite Dr. Vijay Kelkar, an eminent economist, visionary, policy architect, and a key strategy in India's financial reforms. Dr. Kelkar has played a pivotal role in shaping India's economic and governance policies. Currently serving as the Vice President of Pune International Center, he brings decades of expertise in public finance, economic governance, and global financial management. He has held several prestigious positions on both national and international level. Also, he has served as a chairman of the 13th Finance Commission in India, where he has played a crucial role in recommending progressive fiscal policies for equitable development. Beyond his contributions to governance, Dr. Kelkar has also been instrumental in structural economic reforms, tax policy modernization, and energy sector transformations. He was a key architect behind India's economic liberalization and tax reforms, particularly in the introduction of VAT and the roadmap for GST. His expertise in climate finance and sustainable economic development provides invaluable insights into how economic growth can align with urgent climate action. I would please like to call Dr. Kelkar on stage to give the chairperson's remarks. Thank you.
Professor Malik, and distinguished participants. I want to thank Ms. Tambe for a very generous introduction. Unfortunately, my wife is not here. I want her to come home and repeat that to her. It will be very useful. You know, all my working life, working in government, I've been a traditional Stalinist in the sense that I was asking for growth, and the whole design of policies and approach was. So in fact, started my work with the Planning Commission, and we're all growth fathers, and how to maximize growth and in when I left the government, and then again I sort of working on growth, and I gave a lecture at National University in Australia, Narayan lecture about 20 years ago, and I call it India the Growth Turnpike. So I genuinely believe that India's salvation of overcome poverty lies in very rapid growth. But looking back, I think I personally erred on not conscious enough that what are some of the negative externalities, as Professor Nulkar would call it, the impact on our society. In fact, I was not in the morning session, but Madhav and Kargil and we had known each other since school days. We went to school, same school, and then we have been interacting for many, many years. And this is a constant sort of exchange between him and me. And he used to tell me that how misguided my vision is. I think now looking backward, I think he had a point, and I probably should have listened to him much earlier. And but still, I want to I cannot completely throw my hands and give up to him. I still have a question. Was I so wrong to pursue rapid economic growth? If several changes, which negative changes, if they're reversible, then maybe not. I don't know this question which you are raising today of externalities or negative externalities. Are the several changes reversible? Can be corrected, or some all are irreversible? If they're irreversible, then of course I'll stand guilty. But I do believe that many are reversible, which we see in the developed countries. Well, after gaining their technology or reversing, I remember going to Manchester City 30 years ago, and now they're totally different. And that's because of the country is big enough to change the city. So I think maybe we should not still give up on emphasizing growth. Maybe it should be more nuanced now. I think we have to recognize that some changes may be reversible, and then of course we have to be very careful in arguing for. And then maybe the argument of what they call ethical ecology has some compelling argument that if the certain changes are irreversible. So I would still make a case that the country's economic policies will have to still pursue growth, because all the issues which our district panel raised about problems of poverty, problems of which are really faced by, can be much more rapidly mitigated higher growth. So I do believe that emphasizing growth is still is an important focus we should have. Maybe it should be tempered. Maybe it should be tempered. Not maybe, but it should be probably tempered with sort of more Gandhian. Gandhiji was used to call it. It's really not the human need, but human greed is the problem. So maybe we should temper our
greed part of it rather than sort of reduce the growth. So what is a sound or optimal ecological path is really the question, and not just berating the aspiration of higher growth. I think we require a growth which is more intelligent growth. Intelligent means informed mind, now with more knowledge. Now, what are reversible changes, what are irreversible changes, and we should be a little more mindful of this. And today's conference was, I found it very useful. In terms of thinking a little differently, and probably I would sort of try to understand, can we take a more nuanced approach towards growth? Other issue which comes is that are there do we have good knowledge about who bears the cost and who gets the benefits? And in other words, the distribution of benefits and costs, we still don't understand fully. And maybe we should understand much better before we really completely condemn. Because I have a feeling that if you really go for a low grade kind of model, poor may suffer more than with higher growth. So I'm not sure, but I should really think a bit carefully before completely sort of condemn high growth or rapid growth as a national objective. Last point I want to make is really increase of sensitivity, and maybe we do require our 4 women panelists made an extremely important point. And listening to them, I realize that we do need more feminization of government policy making, because the kind of argument insight they gave and brought in is not always seen. The policy is still far male dominated. I think we have to change that and get more women in policy making role, and maybe you get the better happy balance in our policies of economics for growth, technology, or for environment. I really want to really end again emphasizing finally, if you come down to it, and I was thinking myself, finally, as Gandhi said, really a lot of responsibility can come on each of us as individual in terms of safeguarding the planet and safeguarding the what we call the great ecological resources. So I want to thank again Professor Malik for persuaded me to come, because I didn't want to come because I'm, as I say, a certified growth follower. But I think I'm glad I came. I learned a lot, and it helped me to think more deeply now on what we should do about economic policies. And I hope that all of us have taken some takeaways from this one day of what I call yajna we had on understanding of our, what it calls the emergency, climate emergency. So with this very brief remarks, I want to thank all the participants on my behalf and the behalf of Pune Indian Center. And I do want to mention here, today amongst us, we have a very, very special guest, Mr. Nimesh Kampani, who is a great supporter of PIC, and I delighted him to be here. And I want to mention that he is in his own life exemplifies what probably Gandhi says, that all responsibility starts with individual level. So David Bhai, thanks for coming, and really your presence is very encouraging. And please do come when you're in Pune and attend our this sort of debate discussions and
in the morning, in the afternoon, you should have seen there was a very livelier debate between different people. So that there was just this heat, but there was a light also which came out of these discussions. So thank you all, and on my behalf, and again, once more on PS's behalf, I want to thank you all for making this a great success of this conference. And before I conclude, I want to invite Professor Malik to tell us what happened yesterday, because it was a different part of the conference and really more inspirational part of it. So, Amitabh, you want to talk about it? Yesterday was he had involved he mobilized all the college students in Pune, and they all came together. I just want him to brief us what happened yesterday, because in my view, that is extremely promising. Actually, he does it every year, and this year was the time it does. Come.
Thanks to Vijay, my school friend, that all this is happening because we started by agreeing to disagree. And then slowly, I think we found common grounds to do things together. Having said that, it is amply clear that the future belongs to the youth. And therefore, we have been engaging the youth in what we call YOUCAN, YOUCAN. YOU stands for Youth, CAN stands for Climate Action Network. We conducted first of its kind in Pandit Nehru Auditorium in Ghole Road, and our team goes to the colleges and we form teams in the colleges. And yesterday was the second time we did that. 10 colleges participated. Each college had their own teams. We had debate competition. We had essay competition. We had displays by school children below 16. And for that, we took the help of the Khula Asman, the worldwide organization that makes young people think about what is not thinkable. So some of the displays that we saw yesterday was completely out of the world. So it was almost like a full day mela. I spoke to the crowd. Many other people also spoke. But the students also, the thought exchange between the student leaders about what students can do, how one can gear up for green jobs, how one can find a way through all the difficulties and still make a good life. This has been a learning session for us, but then it has been a huge popular session for the youth on behalf of PIC, and we will keep on doing every year. The idea came from none other than Vijay.
I would now request Professor Amitabh Malik to provide Dr. Vijay Kelkar sir and Director sir with the token of love. Please, sir.
Gift. Lata to remember that you came here today. Would you like this or this?
No, he takes the first choice. Director is always the first choice.
And I think with that, we close the. So with that, we close this today's event, a wonderful event, lot to learn, lot to take forward. Thank you very much.